All right, we're live. Welcome back, everybody. All 1 million viewers. So today I am just going to work on a painting that I've been working on instead of starting a brand new painting. But I am going to continue to talk about my adventures of selling my art on the boardwalk, and how I got started, and kind of the path and journey that I've taken to get to wherever it is that I am now. So last week, to kind of recap, I came out to LA in '98. I was trying to get work in the animation industry. Animation industry wasn't hiring many people at the time. I got a job at Macy's. Needed extra money. I started selling my art on the boardwalk in Venice Beach. I was selling color copies of my portfolio pieces to make some extra cash. Started making more money than I made at Macy's, so I quit my job because they wouldn't give me the weekends off. And yeah, so then I went through last week talking about trying to find my personal voice as an artist and a whole bunch of other things like that. And sleeping in my truck overnight to get spaces in the boardwalk as the space became more competitive. How it started out as kind of a cool way to make some money with your art by selling it on the beach, and it was fun. You meeting cool people, and then it got to be super, super competitive for space. And I was sleeping in my truck overnight and facing down and possibly getting in fist fights with people over space. And so I knew I needed to leave because that was the problem, and the city was changing ordinances about who could be down there, because it was a free space for people to exercise their First Amendment, which allowed artists to be out there to display and sell their work. But you get what you pay for in a free space. So I started finding venues where I could buy or rent space to sell at festivals and fairs and college campuses and all those sort of things. So that's kind of a quick recap. If you want to listen to it again, it's on my last two streams. Today, I'm going to talk about a few things, I think. I'm going to kind of fill in some of the gaps of my Venice Beach days before I get into my bankrupting myself in New York story. So to kind of go back to some of the beginning of the boardwalk days, there was a need to improve the display. So the first thing that I learned was to get off the ground. So I started out on the ground with a blanket, and then I made, I needed a way to display my work for people who were coming up to look at it as they walk by on the boardwalk, and I realized that having it on the ground, it was easy to overlook. Obviously, I mean, it's obvious to me now, I guess. So I needed a way for people to be able to see it if they weren't happened to walk right next to where I was setting up. So the first thing I did is I spray mounted some of the examples onto a sheet of foam core, and so I had like a little display board. I'm not sure where I'm going to go in this painting yet. Actually, I think I do. So I had a display board, and basically I had some limitations on what I could do. I had a car, but it was just like a small, crappy, constantly breaking down, Mercury Sable, 1988 Mercury Sable is what I had. It was a piece of crap, and it was always, like I said, always breaking down on me. So the first thing that the consideration I had is that it had to fit in my car, whatever display I came up with. And plus, I couldn't afford to pay for parking, so I had to be able to carry it several blocks from the beach to where I was setting up. So I had this big portfolio case, so everything had to fit in there. So my first improvement was to just improve how I was displaying it, and that was just by getting some sort of display off the ground, which I did. With that, and then I made an A-frame easel to put, with a pegboard to put to put my pieces on display there. So the other thing that I had was that Kinko's was, keep on having to go to Kinko's. So after that first summer of selling my work, I was able to, whatever reason, I was able to get a loan from Apple to buy a computer. And I thought, well, if I can get a computer, I can cut Kinko's out of this equation and make my own prints. I can make my own color prints. And by then the color printers were doing some really cool. I mean, that was like when it really started taking off. You could do photo quality prints with a printer, which was brand new technology, or pretty new technology back in the late 90s. And so, yeah, so I got a loan from Apple Computer for like a few $1,000, and I bought like a Mac G3. I bought a flatbed scanner so I could scan my paintings in, because one of the limitations I had at Kinko's was that everything had to fit on to the color copier. So I couldn't make paintings that were any bigger than that scan bed. And the other thing that was a pain in the ass with Kinko's was that I had to continuously, learn how to use their machines. Some of them would be out of order. Some of them, the colors wouldn't be consistent. So I had to learn how to do all that. And plus, if they had an out of order machine, then I have to go to the next Kinko's, which might be in the next town. Like, isn't a huge deal in LA, but it's like, you don't want to be driving from Burbank to Glendale to Pasadena just to find a color copier at Kinko's that works. So that was another impetus to get my own equipment, that I didn't have to rely on Kinko's to, to make this work. So I got that. I got a color printer. I could print 8.5 by 11-inch prints. And I had a friend that I worked with at Macy's that was also a college student, that I had her go with me when I bought the equipment so I could get the student discount on Photoshop. So I needed a license for Photoshop. I didn't have a bootleg copy of it. I didn't know where to get it. I didn't know anybody with a computer at the time. That sounds kind of funny now. So, yeah, so, I was trying to, the student edition of Photoshop was still the same as the regular edition. So, I was like, so that's what I did that. Anyway, I could save $1, I guess. And, I'm just dilly-dallying on this painting. I'm not sure. I'm trying to, figure out where I want to go with it. We'll start figuring it out as I move along. So, yeah, I was sort of systematically upgrading both my equipment and my presentation. And as I was, and just investing in this, I was also trying to get illustration work, like freelance illustration work. I was, taking money I made and buying advertisements and directories that went to art directors at magazines. And I was still applying for animation jobs and, entry-level positions so I could get into the background painting department eventually. So I was still doing all that stuff. And so at one point, let me keep going where I was at. I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, I got a computer and got a printer, cut Kinko's out of the equation, and started making color prints. And then the next problem I had was, so I didn't want to spray mount these to foam core anymore. That was kind of a cheapo way of doing it. I mean, it worked okay, when you're just doing it as like, I'll make a few extra bucks. But now I was kind of committed to doing this, and I wanted to do it in a way that, made sense. And so I needed some sort of packaging. And I remember there were some photographers on the boardwalk that had these clear plastic sleeves that they put their prints in. And I'm like, that's what I need. And I went and talked to the guy, and he wouldn't tell me where he got them. It was like some sort of trade secret. And, I understand why to do that. It's like everybody's competing with everybody down there. You don't want people just, taking your secrets from you, I guess. But mainly that was just a jerk off move on his part, I think. Like, I learned later on that it doesn't matter how much you tell people, they still got to do it. And not only that, but like um, packaging stuff isn't going to be the straw that broke your back. Somebody's selling art next to you. That's not going to be the problem you have. Is somebody found out where your packaging supply come from. It's just stupid. So anyway, he wouldn't tell me, and so I started. I started going to. Give me 1 second here. I think my Facebook feed is not working for some reason. Well, Facebook, you're going to have to suck it this time, I guess. I'll post it later on Facebook. Be on YouTube only, I guess. So, like I was saying, where was I? Oh yeah, so I needed to find a place, a way to package. So I started going to like there's a place called Pearl Art Supply. It used to be here in LA. I started going to these places and craft stores, and I would get clear plastic sleeves that were made for photo albums, and I would kind of package them in there and tape the ends shut, and that kind of worked. And I don't remember how I found out, but eventually I found out that the place to get those plastic sleeves was a place called Impact Images or clearbags.com. It's something really stupid and basic. I don't remember how I found out, but I finally figured out where this guy was getting those things. And I started ordering those. So then I had a sealable sleeve, the print fit in there. It was a cleaner product, and it was actually cheaper than going to Kinko's. It looked better. It was using archival inks, and so I had something that was a little bit better of a product as far as prints were concerned to sell on the beach. So yeah, so I did that. I built a better display that then I could attach these prints to a pegboard inside, or on for them to be presented so people walk by, I could see it easily. And that was sort of the improvement. So I got it off the ground. I got it onto a display board. And then I made another one because I started realizing I had two kind of bodies of work. I had landscapes and I had illustrative or figurative work. And so I was organizing the way I was displaying them. And as I made more images, I needed more display room and so on and so forth. And I was able to get a little bit of money together to buy a dolly from Home Depot so I could then push everything up to the boardwalk from my car wherever I parked it. I was still not paying for parking because even if I was making $100 in a day, I wasn't going to spend $9 or $10 to park. You give the parking people 10% cut for what? Because anyway, let me ramble on that. So so I would push my display with all my artwork packed on the dolly. I'd bungee cord it to the dolly, and I'd push it a few blocks from wherever I parked up to the beach, and that's how I would set up. And yeah, so the paintings I was making at the time were a lot of fantasy work, and I was making the paintings. I would then scan them into my computer using that flatbed scanner, but I would scan them in pieces and then tile them together in Photoshop so I could make paintings that were larger than the scan bed, which was a huge benefit because then it freed me up to do all kinds of different things, to make bigger paintings that I could sell for more money. So, all kinds of, both financial and creative reasons to have a good scanner. And so I continued to do that. And I think I wanted to go into like, so there was nobody to tell me how to do these things. There were other artists that I met down there, and they had their own way of doing things, but nobody really had a lot of answers. Like, how do you price your work? Like, there was no mentorship program for artists that, trying to figure out how to make a living with their art. And so I remember I was hanging out with a friend of mine, one of the artists down on the boardwalk named Paul, who's Paul Dollins. He's a fantastic artist if you get a chance to look him up. Um, and he turned me on to this movie called Glengarry Glen Ross, and it's based on a David Mamet play. And it's basically what I use to figure out how to sell stuff. And the movie revolves around some sort of washed up sales guys who are they're selling real estate, and it's kind of like what they're doing is like selling people swampland in Florida, so to speak. And so I wasn't taking some sort of like shadiness to what I was going to be doing as far as selling, but there was a key scene with Alec Baldwin where he has a couple of things, and one of them was to always be closing. And how I adapted that idea to my paintings was like, so when you're down on the boardwalk or wherever you're at and you're trying to sell your work and you're talking to people, there's a tendency to want to run up and, like when somebody approaches and starts looking, you just start talking, like start trying to explain what the painting's about, start trying to explain what you're about, where you came from, all these things. And the first thing I learned was the more you do that, the more you're talking, the more you're not letting enough space for somebody to inquire about painting. So you might end up talking to somebody who has no intention of buying anything and not waste a bunch of time, but miss the opportunity to talk to somebody who would have maybe bought something. So what I would do is I kind of developed a policy of attraction rather than promotion of my work. So I wasn't yelling at people or calling people over to come look at my work. I was waiting for people to notice as they walk by, and those that were interested would walk up. And instead of telling people, a long rambling explanation of myself, I just let them look. And if they stood there for more than a few seconds, I would just tell them that I was the artist, and if they had any questions, they feel free to ask. And so if people are just looking, they'll walk off. But some people like what you're doing. You're going to ask, like, well, what's this one about? And so what I learned to do was take they would say, oh, or they would ask me some questions about a few pieces. Oh, they really like the work, and they're just looking. And so if they said what they really like the work, I'd ask them for which one they really liked the most. So I would get them to make some sort of decision about what they were looking at. They would pick, oh, this one, I really like this one right over here. And it might be a painting I did of a mermaid or something. They're like, oh, yeah. And I'd pick it up and I'd hand it to them. The reason I did that was they took possession of it. And then I might say I have a little blurb about the painting. I'm like, oh, yeah, this means this, or this means that. This is why I did that. And then I would shut up. And the reason you shut up is, again, you want to create the space for them to then make a decision about, okay, am I going to hand this back to this guy, or am I going to ask for how much the painting is? And then that's when you get into the negotiation. So the whole process of this is sort of navigating or steering a conversation towards a purchase. And that's what that meant for me, was to always be closing. So I didn't want to waste a bunch of my time talking incessantly, repeatedly telling people over and over the same thing if they had no interest in it. So I would sort of funnel them into a decision process of, are they going to take something, or are they going to walk away? And so that's how I approached that part of it. So the next part would be, they either say, oh, this is cool, they hand it back, or they hold on to it and they keep looking around. Maybe they like more than one. Or, maybe they hand it back, you put it back, and then you just keep letting them look around. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, you don't have to be really assertive in these things, it's almost better to just keep quiet and not open your mouth unless there's something to say that's, unless you're answering a question. You'll likely talk yourself out of a sale faster than you will into one. So, sometimes they would ask how much, you give them a price, and like, okay, I'll take it. And then they'll buy it, or they'll have some, some way around what making the decision, like, oh, I just got here, I don't want to walk around with it. In which case, I was like offered that if they bought it and paid for it, I'd hold on to it till they came back, and because I only had 1 or 2 copies of it or whatever. And sometimes people were like, oh yeah, that, it was a real concern. They didn't want to carry it, which is if you're like hanging out on the boardwalk, makes a lot of sense. And and so that would help. Sometimes it's like, oh well, I don't have any cash. I'm like, you can point out the ATMs to them. But what I learned quickly was that I learned how to get a wireless credit card terminal. So like you start trying to find ways around all the objections to them purchasing. But the reason that you're out on the street isn't for stimulating conversation. You're out there to make a living. And so if you don't make these sales, make money, then you're not going to be making a living with it, and you're going to go home and you're going to be hungry. So we don't want that. So where was I? Blabbing about something. Yeah. So it was always walking them to a decision about the work, about are they going to buy a piece or not. And if I would never be offering, trying to keep people. I didn't want them to buy the work unless it's something they really wanted. And if they really wanted, then I made it easy for them to get to that decision. If they didn't want it, they might give you all kinds of excuses. Just at some point you realize they're not going to buy, and you're like, you got to be fine with that. Not everybody wants to buy something from you, and but they might like what you're doing, and that means that they might come back some other time. People don't like always make real impulse decisions. So you have to learn to not take things personally. Like not every no is a complete rejection. I remember I would be out on the boardwalk and I'd have a really bad day and make almost nothing. And I'd be like, oh man, it sucks. And I would get frustrated and down, and I'd be like, oh man, that sucks. And then on another day I'd make a good amount. I'd be like, oh man, that's awesome. And I get all up and excited. And it was like a roller coaster emotionally. And after you do it enough, you realize that it all kind of evens out. You're going to have some great days and some not so great days. And you learn to not really get too wound up in every up and down of what you're doing. So you get a little bit even tempered about it. Yeah, so I guess the suggestion I have is the quicker you can get over taking these things personally, even when it comes to if somebody has got something negative, outright negative to say to you, it's not, don't worry about it. Or do if you want to, but I found that my peace of mind was more important than fretting about some of those things. So where was I? I was going off on a tangent there. Kind of liking how this cloud of steam here is looking at. It could be kind of cool. Yeah, don't take things personally. So the other thing is people will buy your work if they like it, and the important part is to get it out in front of people. And so I'm kind of explaining to you like how I did it verbatim, like the sort of strategies I developed, and I didn't come out there and figure this all out on one day. Like this is over years of time of like screwing up and wasting my time, and then it just sort of evolves. But like I said, I didn't have a a sales mentor. I didn't have anybody to really show me the ropes of how to do this. Even just on the side of sales, I didn't really know people that were in sales, and the closest thing I had was that Macy's job. That wasn't really, you know, like all the skills I learned selling my art would have made me better working at Macy's probably. But so my point is uh, it takes time, and it might take years. But if this is something that you want to do, like for a living, as an artist, it's that shouldn't matter because there's no other option for you. But this is what you're going to do, and you're going to do what it takes until you figure out what works and what doesn't, both in the making of the art and of the selling of the art, which, like I discussed last week, I think are two separate activities and skill sets, but they do have bearings on each other. All right, so like I was saying, I my guide for how to do this was watching a movie and taking and pretending like that Alec Baldwin speech in the beginning of the movie where he's busting those guys' nuts, like he was talking to me. Like I just took it as some sort of like tough love speech that I better get my act together or I ain't gonna make it. And I didn't have an attitude of like I wanted to you know swindle people or hustle people into making decisions. Like there's guys at the boardwalk that are selling their CDs, and as you walk by, they just hand them to you, and they get a lot of sales that way because people don't know how to say no, but they hand them to anybody. And so I didn't want to do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know. I would rather have people that were buying the work that really were interested in it. So, like I said, it was a policy of attraction. If they were attracted to the work, they'd walk up to it. It would open an opportunity for me to introduce myself, let them ask questions, and a lot of the thing that you develop when that happens and through over and over and over again, where people are asking you questions, is you really get good at talking about your work, and you learn how So there's the difference between making your paintings and your drawings, and then people want to know you. They want to, for some reason, have you explain them to them. Like, what does this mean? Why did you do this? And so maybe you already think in those terms, but if you don't, that's the next step is learning how to converse about your paintings, talk about your work, and a lot of that has to do with you have to kind of figure out what is it that you're up to, like why do you do this stuff, and why should they care, and whatever. It's like I guess that you could call it an artist statement if you're trying to get into galleries and stuff, but really people don't want to hear your artist statement so much as they might ask about a particular painting and why you made it, what was your choices, and so often, so like I said, I was doing fantasy work, so I would just come up with a story that matched the image, and I would tell them a story, and that's what would often help sell the deal, because they would see it, they would have their own thinkings about it, but people like to be given a clue of like, what is it that's going on here, and maybe you will be able to tell them something that they hadn't thought of as far as what's going on, and that will get them excited even more because now they have another insight that like they're going to want a way to talk about it when people come over to their place and they see the artwork, and they, if it strikes up a conversation, they're going to want to have a way of talking about this work to their friends. And so if you can help give them that, that often helps. So like I said, I would just give them my story I had for the painting, and I would have it to a concise, just like a few sentences, maybe a paragraph. You don't have to go into like all kinds of like philosophical meaning behind it. I mean, you can if that's your thing, but I found just some like little, just a little story of, this is a mermaid and her hair is flying up into through the water and his hands reaching down. It would be, this sort of like, it's just slipping through his fingers, this sort of fantasy that he has. And, and people are like, oh, that's kind of cool. And, or something like that. Sometimes you have paintings that people don't ask questions. They see it, they like it, it means something to them, and they go for it. But so I guess my point is that the stories that you come up with, you say them, and then you just be quiet and let people think about what they're looking at. See if they have some follow-up questions. They might. And then you're going to get into the negotiation. They're going to be like, do I want to buy this or do I not want to buy this? And this is, so what's going on when you're being quiet, you're waiting for them to speak next, is that you're just reading their body language. Are they standing there trying to find a way out of here? And it may take you a while to be able to pick up on a lot of these things, but the more you do it, the more you can tell kind of what's going through people's minds, because you've done it 1,000 times for years. So you get good at reading people's sort of like where they're out in the thought process here. And so if you can tell that somebody's like wanting to get out, like they're just looking for a way out, you don't want to like sit there and try to convince them and guilt them into buying something from you, or just, I don't know if that really works, but you don't want to waste their time, and you don't want to, continue. It's like, so you just hang out and let them walk away. But if they're interested, they'll indicate that to you. And sometimes they'll ask you for a price, give them a price. Sometimes they just buy it. Sometimes they want a deal. So sometimes you get people who want to negotiate with you. And so the strategies I developed for that were to, first of all, I would have my price. People would ask me what the prices were. I'd have the price either posted on something, or I would tell them what the prices were, because they would ask you, what's the price for this, what's the price for that. So I had prices for that size and prices for that size, and they were all whatever, no matter what the image was, it was priced by size. So that was simplified for me. And so then they might want to, so say they ask you for, like, I want a deal. What's the best price you have? That would be a common question. Or, can I get a deal? There's a number of things here. First of all, sometimes people need a deal because they love it and they just don't have $10, right? And so you want to, if people were absolutely floored with the work somehow, they just, oh man, they just wish that, that they get a deal. I was always more than happy to work with those people. Like my goal was to have people who collected the work that really wanted it, genuinely were, excited about it. And so that was always sort of a priority for me. And so the more excitement you could sense out of someone, the more exciting it is. You want people like that to have your work. It's, that's fun. At least for me, that's how I approached it. So then there's people who just want to grind a price down, and I wasn't as inclined to work with them. That would depend on, did I really care? Did I just, like, did I need to make my first sale for the day? Had I made nothing all day and I was just like, all right, whatever, I'll give you a good deal on this. We're talking about like $10 and $20 prints. So you got to be able to kind of decide and figure out like where there's a like sort of a push and pull between demand and desperation here when it comes to the pricing. The more in demand you are, the more you can stick to your pricing. and raise your prices and all that sort of stuff. The more you need, the more desperate you are, the more you need the cash, the more flexible you become. That's basically how it works. Um, so going back to the people who just grinding a deal, like, so the way I learned to deal with them was to not just immediately offer a deal to them. So they're looking at a print and they are only, have one. So I would ask them a couple of questions. Ask them, you know, if you buy more than one, or I tell them, I just like, if you buy more than one, I'll give you a deal on it. And then the idea of that is so they had a $20 print, instead of getting $15 or $18 for it, that kind of sale, I was going to get a $30 sale or a $35 sale. So I was going to be making more money to get a better deal. So what I was doing is I was offering them a deal, but the deal was they had to spend more money, which was good for me. And then they got something out of it too. So they got their deal and I got more than just discounting my work. The other thing I would do is, if they just like, oh, I just like this one. And so instead of just dropping my price to some random number, I would just tell them I'm something along the lines of like, I'm open to reasonable offers. So I'd put the impetus on them to name a price. And then I could decide, like, so say it was a $20 print and they wanted this, so say I was willing to give it to them for $15, but they offer $18 because that's all they have in their pocket. Well, by letting them name their price, I actually got a better deal than if I would have just, offered them the price I was willing to sell it for. So you don't want to like start out with a price and then go to another price without them offering something. Because if they don't have a counter offer or they don't have a real offer to give you, then there is no sale. They're just squeezing you, and there's no sense in taking that. I remember I had a person one time that was grinding me on a price for a $10 print, and he wanted it for $7, and I wasn't going to sell it to him for $7. And he was just one of those guys that's kind of a jerk. And I said, look, if you can tell me why it's not worth 10, I'll sell it to you for 7. And he's like, well, I could tell you the same thing. I was like, well, why is it worth 10? I said, because I made it. You can't get it anywhere else, and you don't have any friends that can make one. There's 3 reasons. And he gave me $10. So you got to learn how to deal with these people. And, you could get angry. Like I said, you could get like all frustrated because they're just trying to grind you just to $10. You just take it personally, or you just sort of dance with it. And you're better off in the long run if you go with it and not get butthurt about people wanting a deal on something. At the end of the day, it's like your art is important to you, but it's not. It's it's not. If you think what everything you do is precious, you're going to be suffering a lot. Or that that you got to stand up for your principles, and sometimes you do, but a situation like that, you develop skills on how to deal with these people, and it's basic life skills. And so yeah, you get them to make an offer, and then you can counter offer, to make if they offer you, like, you have a $20 print and they offer you 10, then you can move to something else. Then there's people who it's not even worth your time. I remember, I've had a guy who was wanting to buy this. I had this framed canvas print before I even figured out how to make them early, and he's like, "I'll give you $100 for it." And I was asking $200 for it. I'm like, nah. Said, I think I'll keep it. And he's like, "All right, well, I'm gonna walk around. I'll come back, and my offer will still stand." And I was like, "You can come back 5 times. I don't care. You're not gonna get it for that price." And he came back, and as he walked by, he held out this $100 bill and just jingled it. I was like, "This could be yours." I'm like, "See ya." And I needed the money, but I wasn't going to sell to that guy. I didn't want him having the work. So sometimes you make decisions that are just out of, setting your own boundaries. You don't have to let yourself be abused and swindled and taken advantage of because, you're, out there trying to trying to make a living with your work. It's already tough enough. You don't need to take more garbage on top of it from anybody. Um, but I didn't get mad at him. I just kind of just took some satisfaction that he didn't get what he wanted. And I eventually sold it to somebody else anyways. Like I didn't like, you know, didn't need him. But now he's a story in one of my stories, and you never know. I don't even know who that guy was. Anyways, you're gonna run into a lot of people like that. They're just like jerks and trying to grind you down. Some people just like to grind you down like because they always get a deal. It's like some sort of entitlement. And I love refusing deals to those people and watching them cry and complain and then still buy something. What you'll end up developing if you do this long enough is a lot of confidence in what you're doing because you've just done it so many times that even if every situation doesn't work out, over time that it does. And so you don't get in a situation where you feel like you have to make a desperate decision on sales or something like that. And, having some self-respect and not letting other people negotiate with you in a bad faith way that's not respectful. Like, so I mentioned that I had been doing, trying to get illustration work and all that stuff. And I was running into all kinds of people trying to take advantage of me there too. I guess I say that as like, I don't know that they were trying to take advantage, but it was just, uh, you know, lie, I guess. I had this one guy that I met on the boardwalk who worked at Culver City Studios, and he wanted me to do this illustration for a screenwriting competition. And he wanted me to create this character logo of this green robot holding a script. And we agreed on a price. I think it was like $300 or something. I don't know. But this job turned into be a huge pain in my ass because he wanted tons of revisions really quick, and it was a really tight turnaround. It was like a week, and I busted my ass to get it. And it's like he wanted to see it in person halfway through, so I drove down there. And when I got there, he handed me this contract that we didn't have before I started the job. So he paid a deposit on the job of $150. And then halfway through it, he handed me this contract, and the contract was a work for hire contract, which, if you're not familiar with copyright law, was something I became very familiar with. Oh no, he was. I don't know if it was work for hire, but it was a. He wanted to own all rights to it, the original and everything. He wanted to own everything. Like I couldn't make prints of it, and we hadn't discussed that before. That's what it was. It wasn't a work for hire. This is how I learned about work for hire. And it just seemed kind of shady. It was like we didn't discuss that. That wasn't part of the deal. It's like, and all of a sudden he's presenting me this contract halfway through the project, and he's going to need me to sign it before I get paid, and I've already spent all this time on it. And so what I did at the time is I just kind of shoved it off. I'm like, it's like, let me, I got to look at this. We'll talk about this later. And I went ahead and I finished the project, and I came down to deliver it, and he loved it. I showed it to him. He was like, "Oh, I love it." And then I told him I wouldn't sign the contract, and his true self came out. He got really pissed at me, and I wasn't going to get my check. I wasn't going to get paid for it if I didn't sign that contract. But we never discussed those terms, that he wanted. That was something that he was trying to push on me after I already got halfway through the job. And besides, this is only for $300. Why would you need that kind of exclusivity and rights to the work? And it was just absurd to me. But at the end of the day, I needed the money, and I folded. I had to sign it. It's like, what am I going to do with this anyways? It's like, I don't know how my self-brand. It was so specific to the project that I think I kind of decided that there's no way that this would really be much value to me anyway. But after that, I got wise. I didn't, I joined an illustration forum called the iSpot. I don't even know if that's still there, but they had some threads on there. It was kind of like a Reddit thread. It was a group, but they had copyright attorneys talking about what copyright law is and licensing and all this stuff. And I started to learn what it really was to sell your work that way. It was things I didn't learn in art school, oddly enough. It never really explained what it was that you're doing as an illustrator. Like, what is licensing, and like, how do you negotiate that? Like, I never, maybe I missed that class. We had a portfolio class, but I didn't get any of that in art school. Art school was mainly good for making you proficient at being an employee or making the art, but not in how or what you're doing to sell it. Um, so that's where I learned about work for hire contracts, where basically if you're presented a project and there's any words with work for hire, it changes the legal authorship from you to the employer. It makes it more like you're an employee rather than an independent contractor. And I soon learned that this was becoming a more and more common practice in the illustration field, um, which meant that a lot of the things that artists can make money on as an illustrator was the ability to relicense the work to secondary uses. So say you did a book cover, but some magazine wanted to use it later on, you could license it because as the creator of the work, you're the legal author. Well, so what happened is a lot of companies decided that they wanted to own the work for a couple of reasons. One, um, they didn't they wanted to get more for their money, and so they wanted more exclusivity, so they just got more rights grabby. But the thing is that artists are also inherently not good at negotiating for themselves. So a lot of the starting out artists were just trying to get work any way they can. They'd sign anything, and that made it tougher for other artists because being a young coming out artist, starting out artist doesn't mean that you don't have the skills or the chops for it. But so they're able to get really good work for really cheap. The other thing that was going on at the time was the stock houses and Getty Images and that stuff. That was really getting people in a pinch because Getty Images would own stock. You'd sign up a deal for a stock images for your art. You'd license to Getty, and then you would get almost nothing out of it, and it would be locked up for 5 years, and then you'd have to remember exactly when the contract renewed. Otherwise, it would automatically renew, and you'd be screwed out of your work for even longer. And then you would be competing against yourself for jobs, because it became these stock houses would have so much inventory and so much art that art directors could really just go there to get art really cheap. And yeah, so it was really harming the illustrators from this is the way I remember it anyway. And I could see that there was a lot of talk about like people like don't do this, don't sign these contracts, and then artists could not negotiate so artists weren't able to negotiate like a union in the illustration business. And the reason why is because it would be racketeering or against, be collusion some sort. We're basically price fixing. So artists weren't allowed to set standard pricing together. And if they formed some sort of a union, they would give up the rights to the work anyways, which would defeat the purpose of what they were trying to do. So there was a lot of argument about like what to do here and how to create some sort of um, cooperative or something that wouldn't be illegal. And so, and then on top of that, I was spending money to get work to art directors, and I would spend like $1,500 for a one-page ad in a book of 3,000 artists, and I remember maybe I got one job that paid $600 out of it, out of the whole year. Then the next year would roll around and to do it all over again, and so this leads into the next thing that I discovered about where was I? Sorry, I got distracted for a second. Yeah, so the illustration field I could see was there was a whole fight going on there, and there wasn't as much work. The work was like you're having to give up more and more rights. You're getting paid less and less for it. If you'd already established yourself, you probably were okay. But for people coming into the business, it was not looking good. And so I looked at what I was doing, and what was really working was selling my art on the street and on the boardwalk. And even though I was putting some effort into making that work better, I always kind of figured that was a temporary solution until I could um, get a real job or a real career off the ground, like with illustration or in the animation industry or whatever it was. And so it never really seemed like a real serious. It's like I always had it as this is just what I'm doing temporarily. But I finally dawned on me that this is what's working. And I looked at all this other stuff I was still trying to do that wasn't working, and I was spending all this time and money and effort on it. And I started to think, like, what if I just took all that effort I'm putting into these things that aren't working and putting into the things that are working? And so I quit pursuing illustration work. I quit pursuing animation stuff, and I decided I was just going to sell my art as art uh, exclusively. Um, so I it finally just, so the idea is that you do a lot of different things. Some of them work, some of them don't work, but really, if you find something that works, focus on that. And so that's kind of the key, I think, here is that there's an evolutionary process here that goes on, and it's the process of self-elimination. So or of just elimination. So you eliminate the things that aren't working until you get down to what is, and then you just focus on making the things that are working work better. And that goes with the creation of your work. It goes with selling of your work, all of it. And it might take a while to figure out what's working, what's not working, but that's when you start figuring out what is working. That's where you want to focus your energy. And yeah, so I decided to pursue, selling my art in the street, even though it wasn't glamorous. It's like, well, this is this is what is working, and I'm tired of like chasing all these other things that are just taking up time and energy. And then yeah, so focus on what's working. I guess that's repeat it again. And that's what I did. So I didn't stay focused on Venice Beach because Venice Beach was starting to go south, like I mentioned earlier. It was getting way more competitive for the space, and I was getting really tired of getting there the night before and having to maybe get in a fist fight over space on a boardwalk. It would just seem like this isn't what I want to do. So I started finding other venues. A lot of it I was getting referred to from other artists that were also selling on the boardwalk that had some experience. So that, like I said, I didn't have mentors, but there were people that had figured some things out, and some people were willing to tell you what to do and turn you on to different venues. And then when you learn some stuff or how to do something, you would share your information with them. And so you start learning that one of the biggest things I learned is that you don't compete with other artists. I'd be set up on boardwalk, and right next to me would be really fantastic artists, but my sales rarely had anything to do with their sales, and vice versa. Like, people aren't just they buy what they like, and they're not going to buy from somebody else instead of you. Generally, you'll often find that you share some of the same interests from different people. So you don't have to feel like, especially when you're looking online, I think you see a lot of fantastic artists, a lot of fantastic art out there, but you're not competing with that. People are gonna. It's not like they're gonna not buy your artwork because there's somebody else that's better. Better is a real relative term, anyways. But I think you know what I mean. So you don't have to get discouraged about, like, you don't think that you're good enough or anything like that. You're plenty good enough. if you're not selling your work, the only thing you're not good at is selling it. As long as you're making the work, there's, like I say, I like to say there's a wrench for every nut. So if you're making the work and you can find a place to sell it, um, it's gonna live or die on its own merits generally. Um, People aren't gonna buy it because everybody else is buying it, at least not on the street level anyway. And some of that comes into play in different aspects of the game, but that isn't something that you can rely on because fads come and go and they change. So I wouldn't recommend doing something that's super popular to get attention, or because you know, I don't know. Do what you enjoy doing. Is my advice, and the rest will figure itself out. Well, it doesn't. You're going to figure it out, but you figure it out by doing it. Man, I got 5 minutes. I'm not going to get to the New York story. I can um, get a little bit into it. So, I, as I mentioned, I needed to get out of the boardwalk. It was going to become a hassle. So, I had realized that artists make money when they can not have to stand behind it themselves and sell it. And the way I knew that happened was getting gallery counts that with kind of galleries that sell prints and that kind of thing. And that kind of business came. Uh, I knew of artists who had found those kind of publishing deals and those sort of things at the Art Expo in New York. And so I got it in my head that I was going to get a booth at the New York Art Expo in 2005. And hopefully that would be my ticket out of the boardwalk. I would be able to, um, you know, something would happen. If I could get there and just get it in front of the right people, that something would happen. Something good would come out of it. And I lost my ass. um, I I made more money on the boardwalk the week before I did to the expo than I did at that New York Art Expo. I learned some really crucial lessons about about the business that I think I knew, but I didn't know. I didn't quite get it that clearly. Um, so yeah, I will go into detail on that next week. I'll talk about how what kind of booth I got, why I did it, like I upgraded my booth, all the things I ran into at the show itself, having to deal with union labor that I'd never dealt with before, setting up my booth and um, selling to people that are like looking to carry artwork. I still had all these mixed bag of subject matters and styles and technical things, and how it seemed like the only thing that succeeded there was stuff that had a gimmick and some of my own uh, initial complaints and whining to myself that I did, and ultimately what I took away from it. So I'll be going into that next week. And if there's any other questions you guys have about any of this, I'm kind of just winging it every time I get up here talking. It's like I try to come up with some basic idea of what I'm going to talk about, and then I just wing it. I guess that's what I've always done. But if you have questions, ask them so I can address some of those things in future streams. Uh, do a couple of things that'll give me some focus, and it'll help me provide some content that people, like I guess if I want anything out of this, I want uh, it to be useful. And so I don't know exactly what people would like to know, but I'm sure that I could take a swing at answering any of those how to make a living questions with your art. Yeah. All right. And for those of you on Facebook, you'll be seeing this later, I guess. I will, I'll post it up there later. This is starting to look kind of cool, though. I'm starting to get good vibes off of this. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Hope you enjoyed hanging out with me here and listening to my nonsense stories. They're kind of fun to tell. So, all right. Well, I will sign off for now and catch y'all later. All right.